Commander Park Do-yoon stood on the observation deck of the new Hanyang Defense Station, watching the morning sun rise over the planet Taijin 7. The golden light painted the vast fields of grain that stretched to the horizon. Small farming vehicles moved like insects between the crops, tending to the harvest that would feed millions of people across 3-star systems. It was a peaceful sight. Too peaceful, some might say. Do-yoon had been a soldier for 20 years, but he had not seen real combat in 15. The last war humanity fought was against pirates in the Outer Rim, and even that was more of a police action than a real battle. His job now was to coordinate defense for a colony that had never been attacked, never been threatened, never even been visited by hostile forces. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Dr. Kim Minji joined him at the window, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was the head scientist for the colony's xenobiology department, and one of the few people who understood both alien cultures and human nature well enough to serve as a diplomatic advisor. "Very peaceful," Do-hyun agreed, taking the coffee gratefully. "Sometimes I wonder if we even need a defense force anymore. The colony has been safe for so long that people are starting to forget why we have soldiers at all." Minji smiled, but there was something thoughtful in her expression. "My grandmother used to say that peace is like good health. You only notice how valuable it is after you lose it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the farming crews work in the fields below. New Hanyang was humanity's pride, a completely self-sufficient world that produced enough food to export to other colonies. The 2.3 million people who lived here had built something remarkable. They had schools that taught children from dozens of different Earth cultures. They had hospitals that could treat any known human disease. They had art centers, music halls, and research facilities that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge. "Commander," Captain Lee Jin-ho's voice came through the communication system. "We're getting some interesting readings from the long-range sensors. You might want to take a look." Do-hyun and Minji made their way to the command center, where Jin-ho was standing over a display screen showing the outer edge of their star system. The captain was a good man, careful, thorough, and experienced enough to know when something was worth investigating. "What do we have?" Do-hyun asked. "Unknown ships," Jin-ho replied, pointing to several dots on the screen. "They jumped in about 6 hours ago and have been holding position at the system's edge. They're not responding to our standard greeting messages, but they're not showing any hostile behavior either." Engineer Choi So-min looked up from her station nearby. She was responsible for all the colony's communication systems and had been trying to establish contact with the mysterious vessels. "I've sent messages in every standard format," she said. "Nothing hostile, just basic, 'Who are you?' and 'Can we help?' kind of stuff. But they're not answering." Minji studied the sensor readings with interest. "How many ships?" 12 that we can detect," Jin-ho answered. "But they're using some kind of stealth technology that makes it hard to get exact numbers. Could be more." Do-hyun felt a small chill of concern, but he pushed it down. In his experience, most first contact situations turned out to be simple misunderstandings. Different species had different ways of communicating, different protocols for meeting new races. "Any idea what species they might be?" "The ship designs don't match anything in our database," So-min replied. "But that doesn't mean much. There are thousands of species in the galaxy we haven't met yet." Over the next few days, the strange ships remained at the edge of the system. They didn't come closer, but they didn't leave either. Long-range scans suggested they were conducting detailed observations of the colony, mapping the planet's surface, and studying human ship movements. "They're being very thorough," Minji observed during one of their daily briefings. "This level of observation suggests they're either very cautious or very interested in establishing formal contact." Do-hyun hoped she was right. The colony's defense consisted of a small fleet of patrol ships and a handful of orbital platforms. They were designed to handle pirates or accidents, not a full military engagement. If these visitors had hostile intentions, New Hanyang would be in serious trouble. But as the days passed, the mysterious ships made no aggressive moves. They simply watched and waited. "I think they're studying our culture," Minji said during a meeting with the colony's leadership council. Many species prefer to observe potential trading partners for extended periods before making contact. It shows wisdom and caution. The council members seemed relieved by this explanation. Trade was always good for the colony, and peaceful contact with a new species could open up opportunities for scientific exchange and cultural learning. After 2 weeks, the watching ships finally made their move. A single vessel detached from the group and approached the planet slowly, broadcasting a simple message in broken but understandable human language. "We are the Vorthak Empire," the message said. "We seek to speak with your leaders about trade and mutual cooperation." The colony leadership was excited. First contact with a new species was always a significant event, and the Vorthaks seemed to be approaching with peaceful intentions. Preparations began immediately for formal diplomatic meetings. Minji threw herself into research about Vorthak. Culture, though, information was limited. What little they could gather suggested the Vorthaks were a warrior species, but one that had successfully transitioned to peaceful trade relationships with many other civilizations. "They seem to respect strength," she told Do-hyun, "but they also understand the value of cooperation. Many species that have dealt with them describe profitable trading relationships." The first meeting took place on the colony's main space station. A group of Vorthak representatives came aboard, wearing elaborate armor that seemed to serve more ceremonial than practical purposes. They were tall, muscular beings with thick skin and sharp features that suggested a predatory heritage. Their leader introduced himself as War Commander Vash. Despite his military title, he spoke about trade routes, resource sharing, and cultural exchange. The discussions went well, with both sides expressing interest in further cooperation. "Your people have built something impressive here," Vash told the human delegation. "We would be honored to establish formal relations between our peoples." Over. The following weeks, more meetings took place. The Vorthaks seemed particularly interested in human agricultural techniques and medical technology. They offered advanced manufacturing methods and energy systems in return. But something bothered Do-hyun about the whole situation. The Vorthaks asked very detailed questions about the colony's population, its defense capabilities, and the location of other human settlements. When he mentioned his concerns to Minji, she assured him it was normal diplomatic intelligence gathering. "Every species wants to know who they're dealing with," she said. "They need to understand our military capabilities to know if we're a potential threat or a reliable trading partner." Still, Do-hyun found himself ordering increased patrols and running more frequent training exercises. His soldiers complained about the extra work, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Vorthaks had been studying them for almost 3 months when they finally made their true intentions known. But by then, it was far too late for the peaceful people of New Hanyang to prepare for what was coming. The galaxy was about to learn that some mistakes can never be forgiven, and that waking a sleeping monster was the worst mistake the Vorthak Empire would ever make. The attack came at dawn, when most of the colony was still sleeping. Commander Park Do-hyun was in his quarters, reviewing the morning's patrol reports, when the first alarms began to sound. At first, he thought it might be a drill or a system malfunction. The warning signals were coming from everywhere at once: orbital sensors, ground-based detection arrays, and patrol ships all screaming about incoming threats. Then the communication system crackled to life with Captain Lee Jinho's voice tight with panic. "All stations, this is not a drill. We have multiple hostile contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Estimated fleet size is over 200 vessels. This is not a drill." Do-hyun ran to his window and looked up at the sky. He could see bright flashes of light as the Vorthak fleet emerged from hyperspace, their ships blotting out the stars. It was a massive force, far larger than anything the colony could hope to resist. "All defensive units, take positions," he commanded into his communicator as he rushed toward the command center. Prepare for immediate evacuation of civilian areas. But even as he gave the orders, Do-hyun knew they were hopeless. The colony's defense force consisted of 20 patrol ships and 6 orbital platforms. Against 200 enemy vessels, they might as well throw rocks. In the command center, chaos reigned. Engineers and technicians scrambled to coordinate the colony's response, while incoming reports painted an increasingly desperate picture. "They're targeting civilian areas first," reported Soman from her communications station, her voice shaking. "The schools, the hospitals, the residential districts. They're not going after military targets." On the main display screen, they could see the Vorthak ships beginning their bombardment. Bright beams of energy lanced down from space, striking targets across the planet's surface. But instead of hitting the defense stations or military facilities, the weapons were aimed at places where families lived and worked. The elementary school in Sector 7 disappeared in a flash of white light. 3,000 children and their teachers were vaporized in an instant. The main hospital complex, where Dr. Kim Min-ji had worked for 5 years, was the next target. 500 patients and staff died before they even knew they were under attack. "Why are they doing this?" Jin-ho asked, his face pale as he watched the destruction on the monitors. "This isn't military strategy. This is just murder." Do-hyun understood with horrible clarity. This wasn't a conquest. It was a demonstration. The Vorthaks wanted to show the galaxy what happened to species that didn't submit to their empire immediately. They were making an example of New Hanyang. "Get every ship we have into the air," he ordered. "Try to draw their fire away from the civilian areas." The colony's small defense fleet launched into space, their tiny ships racing toward the massive Vorthak vessels. It was like watching ants attack elephants. But the human pilots didn't hesitate. They knew they couldn't win, but they might be able to save some lives by diverting the enemy's attention. Captain Jin-ho led the defense ships in a desperate charge against the nearest Vorthak cruiser. His fighters managed to damage one of the alien ship's weapon systems before being overwhelmed by enemy fire. Jin-ho's last transmission was simple: "Tell my family I love them." On the planet's surface, the bombardment continued with methodical precision. The Vorthaks weren't trying to destroy the colony quickly. They were taking their time, making sure everyone suffered as much as possible before they died. Engineer Somin worked frantically at her station, trying to get evacuation ships into the air. "I've got 3 transport vessels loaded with refugees," she reported. "They're heading for the escape vector now." But even as she spoke, they watched the Vorthak fleet intercept the fleeing ships. The transports, filled with women, children, and elderly colonists, were destroyed one by one. There were no survivors. "They're not letting anyone escape," Do-hyun realized with growing horror. "They want to kill everyone." The attack continued for 6 terrible hours. The Vorthaks moved systematically across the planet, destroying every population center, every farm, every building where humans lived or worked. They used weapons that caused maximum pain and terror. Energy beams that burned slowly, explosives that scattered shrapnel across wide areas, and gas weapons that made people die in agony. In the research center where Dr. Kim Min-ji had studied alien cultures and promoted peaceful cooperation between species, Vorthak soldiers landed and began executing the scientists one by one. They forced the researchers to watch as their life's work was destroyed, their laboratories burned, and their hopes for peaceful coexistence were murdered along with their colleagues. Commander Do-hyun tried to coordinate resistance from his command bunker, but there was little he could do. His communication with the other defense positions was cut off one by one as the Vorthak systematically destroyed every military installation on the planet. "Sir," Soman called out from her station, "I can still reach the emergency transmission array. If I can get a signal out, I might be able to warn the other human colonies about what's happening here." "Do it," Do-hyun ordered without hesitation. Soman's fingers flew over her controls, working to establish a connection with the interstellar communication network. The transmission array was hidden deep underground and powered by an independent reactor making it one of the few systems still functioning on the planet. "I've got a connection," she announced. "I'm uploading everything. Sensor recordings of the attack, visual feeds from the surface, everything we've seen." The data package included footage of the Vorthak ships arriving, recordings of their commanders laughing as they destroyed civilian targets, and images of the systematic slaughter taking place across the colony. It showed Vorthak soldiers executing wounded civilians who tried to surrender, destroying cultural monuments and libraries, and leaving behind nothing but ash and death. "Transmission complete," Somin reported, just as explosions began echoing through the bunker above them. "The message is out. Every human colony in the galaxy will know what happened here." The bunker shook as Vorthak forces found their location. Do-Yun could hear alien voices in the corridors outside, speaking in their harsh language as they moved closer to the command center. "It's been an honor serving with you," he told his remaining staff. The door exploded inward, and Vorthak warriors poured into the room. They wore the same ceremonial armor they had displayed during the diplomatic meetings, but now it was splattered with human blood. Their leader was War Commander Vash, the same alien who had spoken so eloquently about trade and cooperation. "Commander." "Park Do-Hyun," Vash said in perfect human language, his voice filled with cruel amusement. "Your people fought bravely, but uselessly. This colony is now a lesson for the rest of your species. Submit to the Vorthak Empire or suffer the same fate." Do-Yun looked at the alien commander with contempt. "You made one mistake," he said. "And what is that?" Vash asked, clearly enjoying himself. "You think this will make us submit," Do-Yun replied. "But you don't understand humans very well. This won't make us surrender. This will make us angry." Vash laughed. "Your anger means nothing. Your entire species will kneel before us or be exterminated." The alien raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the bunker's emergency lighting failed. In the darkness, there was a brief moment of silence. Then everything went black for Commander Park Do-Yun. Above ground, the Vorthak fleet began to withdraw. Their mission was complete. New Hanyang was dead. 2.3 million humans reduced to ash and memory. The planet's surface was scarred with craters and burned-out ruins. Nothing moved except the wind blowing through the debris. But in space, traveling faster than light toward every human colony in the galaxy, Somin's final transmission was already spreading the news of what had happened. The images of the massacre were being viewed by billions of humans across dozens of star systems. The Vorthaks had succeeded in destroying New Hanyang completely, but they had also succeeded in doing something else, something they didn't understand and wouldn't understand until it was far too late. They had just woken up a monster that had been sleeping peacefully for 300 years, and now that monster was very, very angry. The transmission from New Hanyang reached Earth 18 hours after the massacre ended. Admiral Yang Minho was having dinner with his family when his emergency communicator began screaming. As the Supreme Commander of Human Defense Forces, he was used to urgent calls. But something about this alarm was different. It was the code reserved for species-level extinction events. He excused himself from the table and hurried to his private office, where he activated the secure communication system. What he saw on the screen made his blood turn to ice. The footage from Engineer Somin's final transmission was brutal and clear. Vorthak ships dropping out of hyperspace, energy beams striking schools and hospitals, transport ships full of children being destroyed as they tried to escape, systematic execution of civilians who attempted to surrender. 3 million humans dead in 6 hours. Minho watched the entire recording 3 times, his face growing harder and colder with each viewing. By the 3rd time through, his hands were shaking with rage. He activated the emergency communication system that connected him to every human military commander in the galaxy. Within minutes, holographic images of dozens of officers appeared around his desk, their faces grim as they received the same footage he had just watched. "Ladies and gentlemen," Minho said, his voice deadly calm, "we are now at war." General Huang, Sura, head of military intelligence, was the first to respond. "Sir, our current forces are not sufficient for a campaign against the Vorthak Empire. They have conquered dozens of species and control hundreds of star systems. Then we will build forces that are sufficient," Minho replied. "How long will it take to activate the emergency production protocols?" Dr. Song Hyuk, director of Advanced Weapons Research, consulted his tablet. "The emergency protocols haven't been used since the Titan Wars 3 centuries ago. We can have the first new warships rolling off the production lines within 3 months. "Too slow," Minho said. "We have mothballed ships in storage. How quickly can we reactivate them?" 2 weeks for the first wave," replied Captain Nam Ji-won, leader of the Ghost Fleet operations. "We have 200 heavy cruisers in deep storage that can be brought online rapidly." Minho nodded. "Do it. I want every decommissioned warship in human space brought back to active status. I want every shipyard working at maximum capacity. I want every advanced weapons project that was shelved for being too dangerous brought back and completed." The military commanders looked at each other with growing understanding. They were seeing something that hadn't existed in human space for centuries: total war mobilization. "Sir," General Sura said carefully, "the cost of this mobilization will be enormous. The economic impact alone could destabilize human civilization." "Human civilization has already been destabilized," Minho replied, his voice like ice. "The Vorthaks made sure of that when they murdered 2.3 million civilians. Now we're going to destabilize them." Within hours of the Admiral's orders, every human world began transformation. Factory complexes that had been producing consumer goods switched to military hardware. Civilian shipyards began retrofitting cargo vessels for combat. Research facilities that had been working on peaceful technologies started developing weapon systems. On Earth, deep in the mountains of North America, massive doors that hadn't opened in 300 years began to slide apart. Inside the hidden bunkers, automated systems came online, beginning the process of awakening humanity's most terrible weapons, the ones that had been built during the last Great War and then sealed away because they were too dangerous to ever use again. Dr. Song Hyuk stood in one of these bunkers, watching as robotic systems began assembling devices that could crack planets in half. "I never thought I would see these things again," he told his assistant. "Do you think we should be building weapons like this?" the younger scientist asked nervously. "The Vorthaks think humans are weak because we choose peace," Hyuk replied. "They're about to learn the difference between choosing peace and being incapable of war." Across human space, the response was the same everywhere. Farmers put down their tools and picked up weapons. Scientists stopped their research and began designing new ways to kill. Artists stopped creating beauty and started creating propaganda that would unite humanity behind a single cause. The transformation was so rapid and complete that other alien species began to take notice. Trade partners who had known humans as peaceful merchants and farmers suddenly found themselves dealing with a civilization that was building warships at an impossible rate. Ambassador Kang Min-hee, humanity's representative to the Galactic Council, received dozens of concerned messages from other species asking about the sudden military buildup. "We understand your concern," she replied to each inquiry with the same message. "But humanity is simply taking necessary steps to defend itself against an unprovoked attack. We harbor no ill will toward any species except those who have chosen to make themselves our enemies." But privately, Min-hee was as shocked as anyone by the speed of humanity's transformation. In less than a month, human military production had increased by over 3,000%. Ships that had been explored space peacefully for decades were being fitted with weapons that could reduce planets to rubble. The most dramatic change was in the human population itself. The footage from New Hanyang had been broadcast on every human world and the reaction was unlike anything in recorded history. Millions of civilians volunteered for military service. Entire families dedicated themselves to supporting the war effort. Children drew pictures of human soldiers defeating alien monsters. Students in schools began learning about military strategy alongside their regular subjects. Even the elderly began working in factories, building ammunition and supplies for the growing human fleet. Captain Nam Jiwon was amazed by the response when she visited recruitment centers on various human worlds. "I've never seen anything like this," she reported to Admiral Minho. "We're getting more volunteers than we can process. People are literally lining up for days just to join the military." "What kinds of people?" Minho asked. "Everyone," Jiwon replied. "Farmers, teachers, engineers, artists, doctors. Yesterday I met a grandmother who wanted to enlist as a gunner because her great-grandchildren were killed on New Hanyang. The transformation wasn't just about building weapons and ships. Humanity was remembering skills that had been forgotten during 3 centuries of peace. Military academies that had become little more than ceremonial institutions suddenly found themselves training tens of thousands of new officers. Survival schools that had been tourist attractions became serious training centers for soldiers who would fight on alien worlds. Most importantly, humanity was remembering how to hate. For 300 years, humans had prided themselves on being a peaceful species. They had built a civilization based on cooperation, understanding, and respect for all forms of life. But the Vortex had shown them that not all species shared these values, and that sometimes peace was only possible through strength. Dr. Lim Dong-hyun, one of humanity's leading experts on alien biology, found himself designing weapons specifically to kill Vortex. "Their physiology has several weaknesses," he explained to a group of military planners. "Their respiratory system is particularly vulnerable to certain chemical compounds." "Are you talking about poison gas?" asked Colonel Bae Min-jae, who was leading the formation of specialized anti-Vorthak units. "I'm talking about whatever it takes to make sure they can never hurt another human being," Dong-yun replied coldly. The galaxy watched this transformation with growing alarm. Species that had known humans as peaceful traders and explorers suddenly found themselves looking at a civilization that was building weapons of mass destruction with frightening efficiency. Some alien governments sent diplomatic messages expressing concern about human militarization. They received polite but firm responses explaining that humanity was simply defending itself against aggression. Other species that had been conquered by the Vorthax began sending secret messages to human representatives, asking if humanity might be willing to help liberate their worlds. These messages were carefully filed away for future reference. But the most significant response came from the Vorthak Empire itself. Emperor Vorthak, ruler of hundreds of worlds and conqueror of dozens of species, sent a message directly to Earth, demanding that humanity surrender immediately or face total extinction. The response came from Admiral Yang Minho himself, broadcast across all galactic communication networks. "The Vorthak Empire has declared war on humanity by murdering 2.3 million civilians. We accept this declaration, but we will not be the ones facing extinction." The message was simple, direct, and terrifying in its implications. For the first time in galactic history, a species had responded to Vorthak aggression, not with submission or desperate resistance, but with a promise of total war. The monster was fully awake now, and it was hungry for revenge. 6 months after the massacre at New Hanyang, the human war machine was ready to strike. Admiral Yang Minho stood on the bridge of the UHS Retribution, humanity's newest and most powerful warship. Around him, a fleet of over 3,000 vessels, prepared for their first attack against the Vorthak Empire. These weren't the peaceful exploration ships that had carried humans to the stars. These were instruments of war, built with one purpose: to make the Vorthax pay for what they had done. "Fleet status report," Minho ordered. Commander Yoon Seulgi, captain of the Retribution, consulted her displays. All ships report ready for combat, sir. The Ghost Fleet has confirmed that our target is unaware of our approach. The target was Nexus Prime, a Vorthak colony world with a population of 50 million. It was heavily defended and strategically important to the Vorthak Empire. It was also the perfect place to send a message. Signal the fleet, Minho commanded. Begin the attack. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus Prime system. The Vorthak defenders were caught completely off guard. Their sensors detected the approaching ships, but they couldn't believe what they were seeing. No species had ever attacked the Vorthak Empire with such a massive force. The Vorthak commander of Nexus Prime, War Leader Korth, activated his emergency communication system and sent a desperate message to his superiors. Massive human fleet approaching Nexus Prime. Estimated ship count exceeds 3,000 vessels, requesting immediate reinforcement. But by the time his message could reach other Vorthak forces, the battle was already over. The human attack was unlike anything the Vorthaks had ever experienced. There were no demands for surrender, no warnings, no attempts at negotiation. The human ships simply began destroying every Vorthak military installation in the system with devastating efficiency. Colonel Bae Min-jae led the Vengeance Corps, the specialized units that had been trained specifically to fight Vorthaks. His soldiers landed on Nexus Prime while the orbital battle raged overhead, moving through Vorthak military complexes like death itself. "Remember New Hanyang," was their battle cry, and they showed no mercy to any Vorthak soldier they encountered. But what shocked the galaxy was what the humans did next. Instead of slaughtering the civilian population like the Vorthaks had done, on New Hanyang, the human forces began an organized evacuation. Major Park Sang-ho coordinated the effort, using transport ships to move Vorthak civilians to safety, while his soldiers secured the area. "Why are we saving them?" asked one of his sergeants, as they helped load frightened Vorthak families onto evacuation ships. "Because we're not like them," Sang-ho replied. "We don't murder children to make a point." The evacuation was systematic and efficient. Within 12 hours, every Vorthak civilian on Nexus Prime had been relocated to refugee ships that would take them to neutral worlds. The humans provided food, medical care, and protection during the evacuation. Then they completely destroyed every trace of Vorthak military presence on the planet. When the evacuation was complete, Admiral Minho broadcast a message across all galactic communication networks. The planet formerly known as Nexus Prime is now under human control. All Vorthak civilians have been safely relocated. All Vorthak military personnel have been eliminated. This is what justice looks like. The message sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. No species had ever attacked the Vorthak Empire so boldly, and certainly no species had ever shown such a combination of devastating military power and protection for enemy civilians. War Commander Vash, the same Vorthak leader who had overseen the massacre at New Hanyang, was captured during the attack on Nexus Prime. He was brought before Admiral Minho on the bridge of the Retribution. "You cannot win this war," Vash snarled, his ceremonial armor now torn and bloodied. "The Vorthak Empire controls hundreds of worlds. We have conquered dozens of species. You are just one race among many." Minho looked at the alien with cold eyes. "You made a mistake when you killed those children on New Hanyang. You thought it would make us afraid. Instead, it made us angry. And when humans get angry, we do terrible things." "What do you plan to do with me?" Vash demanded. "You're going to help us send a message," Minho replied. The message was broadcast throughout Vorthak space. It showed War Commander Vash, the hero who had conquered New Hanyang, sitting in a human prison cell. Behind him was footage of the systematic destruction of Vorthak military forces on Nexus Prime. "This is what happens to those who murder human civilians," Admiral Minho's voice explained over the images. "The Vorthak Empire has declared war on humanity. We accept this declaration, but you will not be the ones who survive it. The effect on the Vorthak Empire was immediate and devastating. For the first time in their history, they faced an enemy that could match their military might and exceed their determination. Worse, they faced an enemy that fought with a fury they couldn't. Understand Emperor Vorthak himself called an emergency session of his war council. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our intelligence said the humans were a peaceful species. Where did this fleet come from?" His military advisors had no good answers. "They appear to have hidden military capabilities," reported his chief intelligence officer. "Our agents observed them for months before we attacked New Hanyang. They showed no signs of this kind of military strength." "Then our agents were incompetent," the Emperor roared. "Find out how many ships they have, where they're building them, and how we can stop them." But the humans weren't making it easy to gather intelligence. Captain Nam Ji-wan's Ghost Fleet had spent months infiltrating Vorthak space, placing spy devices and sabotage equipment throughout their territory. Now those devices were activating, disrupting Vorthak communications and destroying key military installations behind enemy lines. Fleet Admiral Cho Ji-hoon coordinated simultaneous attacks on 17 different Vorthak systems. Each attack followed the same pattern: overwhelming force against military targets, complete protection for civilians, and total annexation of territory. The speed and coordination of the human assault was terrifying. Vorthak forces that had expected to face desperate resistance from a defeated species instead found themselves fighting a military machine that seemed to anticipate their every move. General Kim Tae-hyung led the liberation of Koros, a world that had been enslaved by the Vorthaks 50 years earlier. The Koros people were a peaceful species of farmers and artists who had been forced to work in Vorthak weapons factories. "You are free," Tae-hyung announced to the assembled Koros population after his forces had driven out their oppressors. "Humanity offers you protection and partnership. The Vorthaks will never enslave you again." The grateful Koros immediately allied themselves with humanity, providing valuable intelligence about other enslaved worlds and hidden Vorthak military installations. This pattern repeated itself across Vorthak space. Species that had been conquered decades or centuries earlier found themselves liberated by human forces. Instead of new masters, the humans offered them something the Vorthaks never had: genuine partnership and protection. Commander Oh Hyejin led hunter-killer groups that tracked down fleeing Vorthak leadership with relentless efficiency. "They think they can hide," she told her teams. "They think they can escape responsibility for what they did. They're wrong." Vorthak war leaders who had committed atrocities during their conquests found themselves facing human justice. Those who had shown mercy to conquered populations were offered exile. Those who had committed genocide were simply eliminated. The psychological effect on the Vorthak Empire was devastating. For centuries, they had been the hunters. Now, they were the prey, and they didn't know how to handle it. Emperor Vorthak sent desperate messages to other alien powers, begging for intervention. "The humans have become a threat to galactic stability," his messages claimed. "If they are not stopped, they will conquer the entire galaxy." But the other species had seen the footage from New Hanyang. They had also seen how the humans treated enemy civilians during their attacks. The general consensus was that the Vorthaks had brought this war on themselves. Some species even began offering covert support to the human war effort, providing intelligence and safe harbors for human ships. The Vorthaks had made enemies throughout the galaxy during their centuries of conquest, and many species were happy to see them finally facing a superior foe. As the human fleet prepared for its next series of attacks, Admiral Minho received a transmission from Earth. It was from President Lee Soo-young, the elected leader of the United Human Republic. "Admiral," the president said, "the entire human population stands behind you. Every man, woman, and child on every human world is working to support this war effort. We will not stop until justice is served." Minho nodded grimly. "Understood, Madam President." The Vorthax wanted to teach us about the nature of the galaxy. We're going to teach them about the nature of humanity. The hunt was just beginning, and the humans were very good at hunting. The end came faster than anyone expected. In less than 2 years, the mighty Vorthak Empire that had conquered dozens of species and controlled hundreds of worlds was reduced to a handful of desperate survivors hiding in their home system. Admiral Yang Minho stood on the observation deck of the UHS Retribution, watching the final human fleet assemble for the last battle. Around the Vorthak homeworld of Vorthak Prime, over 5,000 human warships waited in perfect formation. It was the largest military force in galactic history, and it had one simple mission: to end the Vorthak Empire forever. Final Fleet. Status report, Minho ordered. Fleet Admiral Cho Ji-hoon consulted his tactical display. All battle groups report ready for the final assault, sir. Intelligence confirms that the remaining Vorthak forces are concentrated around their homeworld. Estimated enemy strength is 300 ships and orbital defense platforms. The numbers told the story of humanity's systematic dismantling of Vorthak power. From an empire that once commanded thousands of vessels, the Vorthaks were down to their last few hundred ships. Every other world they had controlled was now either under human protection or had been liberated and returned to its original inhabitants. Sir, Commander Yoon Sulgi reported, we're receiving a transmission from Emperor Vorthak himself. Put it through, Minho ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the alien ruler who had ordered the massacre at New Hanyang. Emperor Vorthak looked older and more desperate than he had 2 years ago. His elaborate robes were torn, and his eyes showed the fear of a predator who had finally become prey. Admiral Minho, the Emperor began, his voice shaking, I propose an immediate ceasefire. The Vorthak Empire formally surrenders to humanity. We offer complete reparations for the attack on New Hanyang and the return of all conquered territories. Minho listened to the offer with a face like stone. Around him, his bridge crew waited to hear humanity's response to the alien leader who had ordered the murder of 2.3 million civilians. Emperor Vorthak, Minho replied calmly, you had the opportunity to coexist peacefully with humanity. You chose genocide instead. You declared war on our entire species when you murdered innocent children. Now you face the consequences of that choice. Please, the Emperor begged, his dignity crumbling completely. My people are not all responsible for what happened at New Hanyang. Many Vorthaks opposed the attack. Surely you can show mercy to the innocent. We will show mercy to the innocent, Minho agreed. All Vorthak civilians will be evacuated to safety before we begin our assault. But the Vorthak Empire, the government that ordered genocide, and the military that carried it out, will be completely destroyed. The transmission ended, and Admiral Minho turned to address his fleet commanders. Begin civilian evacuation procedures. I want every non-combatant removed from the planet before we start the attack. What followed was the largest evacuation operation in galactic history. Human transport ships, protected by overwhelming military escorts, began moving millions of Vorthak civilians off their homeworld. The operation took 3 days and was carried out with the same efficiency that had characterized every human military action in the war. Major Park Sang-ho, now promoted to general, oversaw the ground evacuation efforts. His soldiers, veterans, of dozens of battles against Vorthak forces, showed remarkable discipline in protecting the very species they had been fighting. Why are we saving them? Asked a young soldier as they helped load Vorthak families onto transport ships. Because that's what separates us from them, Sang-ho replied. They kill civilians. We protect them. That's why we're going to win. The Vorthak military made several desperate attempts to disrupt the evacuation, but they were easily defeated by human forces. Commander Oh Hyejin led strike teams that eliminated any Vorthak units that threatened the civilian evacuation, ensuring that the operation proceeded without casualties on either side. When the evacuation was complete, humanity delivered its final ultimatum. President Lee Soo-young herself addressed the remaining Vorthak leadership. You have 1 hour to surrender all military forces and submit to human justice. Anyone who lays down their weapons will be treated according to galactic law. Anyone who continues to resist will be eliminated. Emperor Vorthak's response was defiant. The Vorthak Empire will never surrender to an inferior species. We will fight to the last warrior. So be it, President Soo-young replied. The final battle lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. The human fleet attacked with overwhelming force and perfect coordination. Vorthak defenders, who had once seemed invincible, were swept aside like debris in a hurricane. The orbital defense platforms that had protected the Vorthak homeworld for centuries were destroyed in the first 30 minutes of the assault. Dr. Lim, Dongyun's biological weapons proved devastatingly effective against Vorthak military forces. Colonel Bei Minjae's Vengeance Corps led the ground assault, moving through Vorthak military installations with lethal precision. Emperor Vorthak made his last stand in the Imperial Palace, surrounded by his personal guard and the last remnants of his once mighty military. When human forces breached the palace walls, he was found hiding in his private bunker, no longer the proud conqueror who had ordered genocide against humanity. General Kim Tae-hyung was the one who captured the emperor. "Your empire is finished," he told the alien ruler. "Your military is destroyed. Your worlds are liberated, and your people are under human protection." "What will you do with me?" the emperor asked, his arrogance finally replaced by genuine fear. "That's not for me to decide," Tae-hyung replied. "You'll be tried for genocide by the representatives of every species you've wronged." The trial was held on New Hanyang in a specially constructed courtroom built on the site where the colony's elementary school had once stood. Representatives from every species that had suffered under Vorthak rule were present to witness justice. Emperor Vorthak and his surviving war leaders were found guilty of genocide, crimes against sapient life, and the systematic oppression of dozens of species. The penalty was death, carried out by the same energy weapons the Vorthaks had used against human civilians. But the real end of the Vorthak Empire came not with the Emperor's execution, but with humanity's declaration about the future of the Vorthak people. Ambassador Kang Min-hee addressed the Galactic Council with humanity's final decision. The Vorthak Empire is dissolved. The surviving Vorthak population will be relocated to a single world under human supervision. They will be forbidden from developing military technology or leaving their designated planet without human permission. Any attempt to rebuild their empire or threaten other species will result in their complete extinction. The galaxy received this news with a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that the Vorthak Empire was finally gone, but fear at the demonstration of humanity's power and determination. "You've done something unprecedented," the representative of the Altarian Confederation told Ambassador Min-hee. "You've completely eliminated a galactic empire in less than 2 years. How do we know you won't do the same to other species?" Min-hee's response became famous throughout the galaxy. "Humanity offers friendship to those who seek peace and extinction to those who choose genocide. We will not be the aggressors, but we will never again be the victims. Choose wisely." The memorial on New Hanyang was completed 5 years after the end of the war. 2.3 million names were carved into black stone, surrounding a simple inscription. "They thought we were weak. They were wrong. They will not make that mistake again." Dr. Kim Min-jae, one of the few survivors of the original massacre, became humanity's chief ambassador to the galaxy. At the memorial's dedication ceremony, she spoke words that would be remembered. "For generations, we built a civilization based on peace, cooperation, and respect for all life. When that civilization was attacked, we showed the galaxy what happens when peaceful people are pushed too far. We prefer peace, but we are very, very good at war. The choice of which version of humanity you meet is entirely up to you." The galaxy learned its lesson well. In the decades that followed, No species ever again made the mistake of targeting human civilians. Trade flourished, diplomatic relations improved, and peace spread throughout known space. But everyone remembered what had happened to the Vorthax. Everyone understood that humanity's preference for peace came with a terrible promise. Attack our innocent, and we will make sure your species is no longer allowed to exist. The monster had returned to sleep, but its dreams were filled with the memory of justice served and the promise that it would wake again if needed. The galaxy was a more peaceful place because of it.